access on the NLADA site by going to Tools and Technical Assistance, and then Webinars, and then you should be able to see this one. So this is the third part of our three-part webinar series. The first two parts were on research and federal funding, and another one was on partnerships, specifically SSVF partnerships and medical legal partnerships. Feel free to send us questions throughout the presentation. We will answer and ask them both in between presenters, and then we also have time at the end. You can do this by sending the NLADA host me a message through the Q&A at the bottom right part of your screen. You can also chat with us during the presentation. If for any reason you have audio or technical difficulties, we are here to help you troubleshoot. All right, so today's presenters, my name is Casey Chiappetta, and I work with the legal services team here at NLADA. Radhika is also joining us. Our guest presenters are Sean Clark from the VA and Nan Heald. Nan might not be able to make this webinar session, and if she is unable to make it, she will record her slides and we will merge them at a later date. So today's agenda, we're going to start off with some previous webinar highlights, go over just a very brief overview of the last two webinars and where you can find them. And then we're going to launch into the substantive topics for today's webinar, mainly screening and partnerships and how the VA can work with you and help you. And then some tech tools with a highlight of Stateside Legal, which is run by Pine Tree Legal Assistance up in Maine. All right, so moving along, the previous webinar, the first webinar we held was on research and federal funding. We talked about what the research says and how legal aid is often uniquely positioned to help veterans, whether they are homeless or not. We pointed to the VA's challenge survey, which is a survey of homeless veterans and social service providers, which finds that consistently over the years, there are very high unmet needs that are related to legal assistance. And those that are not specifically related to legal assistance, such as legal assistance related to eviction and foreclosure, they often have a legal component. And then we also touched on different types of federal funding that can support legal assistance in your work. So we went over SSVF, VETS, Grant Per Diem, and HUD-VASH. Last webinar, we went over service delivery and partnerships. So all of these slides are going to be available online, which will allow you to click on the links throughout, and then the links are also posted at the bottom. So you can access both previous webinars through these links, typing it in, or going to the NLADA webinar page. So in this webinar, we heard from the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership at George Washington University, and Jen Trott from there went over the VA Readiness Guide, which is a toolkit that walks you through how to set up a medical legal partnership, identify champions within your partnering organization, and so forth. We also heard from Patrice Palvino at Coast to Coast Legal Aid about their SSVF model with Broward Legal Aid, and also their very, very cool pro bono partnership and work with that. So moving into today's topic, screening for veterans. So why screen for veterans? Knowing a military background can help identify resources and benefits that clients wouldn't otherwise be able to access. It can also help you if you need to refer them out for other services. Military backgrounds are not always spontaneously shared. For example, asking a veteran, "Are you a veteran?" might not be the best way to get an answer to your question. Another reason why screening for veterans is important is that it can help you in data collection, like tracking other special populations, which we will talk in later webinar series, such as those suffering from opioid use disorder. By tracking the special populations that you are serving, you can gather data to show potential funders or other social service providers, community partners, that you're successful and that you have a proven track record in serving this particular population. The VA recommends posting a sign letting veterans and service members know that you would like to know if they have served. Sean will go more into some of the resources that the VA has for you on how to ask the right questions. But these are a few select resources for you. So the VA has a pocket card for health professionals. This pocket card is also applicable to legal aid professionals as well. It offers sample questions about military experience, compensation benefits, living situations, unwanted sexual experiences, and more. The VA also has sample screening questions that can help you in identifying whether or not the client who's walked through your door has served in the military. And then the Uniformed Services University has modules that can help you learn a bit more about military culture and how it might affect your practice and clients. And with that, I am turning the speaking power on over to Sean. All right, Sean, your turn.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone on the call this afternoon for the interest in the topic. I'm happy to be here and talk with you about VA as a source of resources that can be extremely valuable for your clients, but also to talk about VA as a partner for you. And that's something that I and my colleagues are really excited about, continuing work to build partnerships between VA and legal service providers across the country in response to what we just heard about, what we've known about legal services, or excuse me, legal needs, and the degree to which they're unmet, particularly in veterans who are homeless and at risk, and that having been true for several years now, as we've learned through the challenge survey. I'm flying solo today, but as you see here, there is another name listed on this slide. This is my colleague, Lara Eilhart. She's an attorney in VA's Office of General Counsel, and she's our agency's point person on legal services issues and really has been for years. So I want to start out by acknowledging her. Some of the material in the next few slides is hers, and this is something that Lara has been working on and really leading VA's efforts on for a number of years now. Let's see. We could move to the next slide. I won't belabor the challenge information too much because I know it's been covered previously, and Casey just covered it very nicely. But I do want to just make a couple of points about what we know through challenge. I always count 5 of these top 10 unmet needs that we hear about from homeless veterans and service providers who work with homeless veterans as being quote-unquote legal needs, and I include discharge upgrades. It's not a legal need per se, but it's one that veterans often address with the assistance of an attorney, and so I lump that in. I think that is a stealth legal need, if you will, that we see on the challenge results. I also want to note that many of these issues, as I'm sure won't surprise anybody on the call, can be intertwined, and so we see listed separately here child support and family law issues, and then the restoration of driver's licenses. Those are broken out separately, but oftentimes, those two things occurring, in parallel, that may point to really the same root situation, that a driver's license has been suspended or revoked due to a child support arrearage, and one of those issues can't really be tackled without getting to the bottom of the other. So I say that just to say that a fair amount of complexity can hide in this list that looks fairly straightforward at a glance, and to talk about discrete issues when they always aren't. They may be closely tied together and require kind of a multi-pronged approach to get somebody's situation stabilized. Another point about discharge upgrades that I just wanted to mention, that is, of course, an end in itself, and something that is, can be tremendously important to veterans. Getting that status resolved, particularly when the veteran feels that that was the result of a process at the time that was unfair, that they left the military under circumstances that felt procedurally wrong to them, and that they felt they were wrongly harmed by. But there are real direct, tangible consequences of that process when it's successful as well. As I'm sure many of you know, discharge status is one of the main building blocks of eligibility for VA healthcare and VA financial, educational, and other benefits as well. And so getting a problematic discharge upgraded can make an immediate difference in the array of services that the veteran is able to access from VA. So the payoff for that, pursuing that process, can really be enormous and transformative in a veteran's life, in addition, again, to correcting the record, so to speak. I mentioned a moment ago that challenge results have been holding fairly consistent over, I'd say, the last 10 years now, as far as the prevalence of legal needs on the top 10 list of homeless veterans' unmet needs that we're hearing about from those two populations, from homeless veterans and from service providers. So, we really see this as a sign of, the mismatch between the needs of the population and the services that VA is able to provide. And that's a big part of the initial intent behind the challenge process, is to get a sense at the local level and rolled up at the national level, what are the needs in this population, and to what extent is VA equipped to deliver services that can help address the needs. 20 years ago, longer than that now, when Challenge got started, a lot of the needs that topped this list were for things like shelter and what you would call much more basic needs. And as those have fallen off, that really has happened in conjunction with the growth of programs in VA that get veterans into transitional housing programs, get them into permanent housing opportunities, and address other more basic needs. And what we're left with as time goes on are an increasing concentration of these issues that VA is not equipped to deliver services for itself. So this really points out the need for, at a minimum, building some strategic partnerships in the community, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Excuse me. If we could go to the next slide. So what can we do in response to this information? We are aware that this need is widespread in the population, that it has been for some time. What can we, what's the best way to begin approaching serving the veteran population? Of course, and again, I won't dwell on this because I know this has been covered, but asking clients about their veteran status and the particular way to do that that's going to be most effective. Casey pointed out good resources that VA has available online that are just quick thumbnail guides to doing this in a way that's not going to discourage somebody from self-selecting out when they have, in fact, served in the military, but may not respond, for example, to the term veteran. That is a term that's understood many different ways. And there's a long there of different understandings and interpretations of what it means. I won't try and do an exhaustive one, but understand that there can be a gendered component to this, and that female veterans don't always or haven't always thought of themselves using that term, that the term veteran indicates service in combat specifically, and so under that rubric, ruling out a large number of veterans who've not seen combat, and a generational piece as well, that veterans may think of that term as applying to members of the World War II generation, for example, the Vietnam generation, but not to themselves. And so avoiding that term is really the best way to cast a broad net here at the outset in an engagement with somebody, and to ask a question along the lines of what you see here and asking, did you ever serve in the U.S. military, including the Guard or Reserves? And this is adapted from those VA resources Casey mentioned earlier. This is roughly what you'll see there. Using that language is broad enough, accessible enough that it is hopefully not going to prevent someone from disclosing that information based on a misunderstanding about what's being asked. So asking the question, asking it the right way, obviously is important. What happens then? And that's what I want to talk about next, and specifically partnering with VA to help ensure that veterans are getting access to the services that are available to them and that can be responsive to their needs. So if we could go to the next slide. You may have an existing partnership with VA staff who serve your community, and if you do, that's wonderful. There are, I know, across the country, there are examples of really long-standing collaborations between VA medical centers, but particularly the homeless programs, I know in a lot of locations, and legal aid providers, legal service agencies. That's not the case everywhere, and so I just wanted to be sure that everyone understands if you don't have a relationship like that at the VA medical center that serves your area, that you've got a place to start. VA is an enormous system. It is, the websites are getting better. That's the focus of a lot of energy and attention right now at the national level, but there is a maze of information to get through, and it can be difficult to find what you need when you're not already familiar with the VA system. And so just so that everybody has a place to start, if you don't have a name and a contact and a relationship with someone who serves your area, I would ask you to think about the Veterans Justice Outreach Program and a specialist who's at the medical center who serves your part of the country. If you're not familiar with the VJO program, we've been around for about 10 years now. This is a workforce of social workers, primarily. They are clinical staff. Every one of our medical centers across the country has at least one of them. Most now have more than one. And their function is really to serve as the liaison between the VA healthcare system and the criminal justice system in the communities that facility serves. That said, that is, the genesis of the program. It was founded to do outreach to veterans in local jails, to work in veterans treatment courts, and that still defines the role. But as you can imagine, veterans who we see who are involved with the criminal justice system often have unmet needs for civil legal services as well. And so VJO specialists, by and large, have a lot of experience working with veterans who have ongoing civil legal issues as well, and need to see about accessing assistance with those. And so I won't read our mission statement to you here, but this is what we're about. Again, the focus on criminal justice, but over the years, an increasing awareness of and focus on civil legal needs of our veterans as well. I mentioned that every one of our medical centers across the country has at least one VJO specialist who is serving in this role. Those folks are listed at the website that's here on this slide, and you can send them an email. They're listed by name, and you can write the VJO specialist directly when you go to your state, find the facility that serves your area, and you can drop a line to the VJO specialists to reach out directly that way. The outreach that VJO specialists do is not an end in itself. The point of it all, and this is true for our prison outreach program as well, is linkage to responsive services that are going to assist that individual veteran get their needs met, whatever those needs are individually assessed to be. And so the VJO in your community or who serves your area is really a good person to know for that reason, because they are called on every day to be aware of all the services that VA has, both broadly and specifically at that facility, so what's available and what the procedures are, for that facility in particular, and facilitating access to those services for the veterans who they're working with. And so that is, certainly relevant experience if you are working with a client who's a veteran who may not have accessed VA services before, may have, perceived encountering a barrier accessing VA services before. The VJO specialist is a good person to be in touch with because that is a big part of their day-to-day function, getting veterans into those services as they're needed. So they can help, facilitate, as I mentioned, access to clinical services for the veterans who you're working with, and are also, I think, just good resources for learning a little bit more about our system and how to navigate it, and good people to know in general. And then, like I mentioned, a good place to start. They can also help you build make a different connection with other VA staff, build a broader network within our system. If the nature of your practice or your organization means that you're working, just for example, exclusively with individuals who are homeless or at risk, some of whom are veterans, it may make sense for you to have a direct partnership with the homeless programs at that VA medical center. The VJO specialist can help facilitate that. He or she may be a part of the homeless programs him or herself, but even if not, again, boundary spanning, linkage to services, kind of building bridges is the name of the game in the VJO program. So I want to plant that seed with everybody that if you're not already in touch with the VJO specialist working your area, please don't hesitate to reach out, and here's how to do it. So if we can switch to the next, one more thing, important thing too. Over time, there have been, and over the recent past, there have been some significant expansions of eligibility, specifically for mental health services within VA for veterans who have types of discharges that have historically excluded them, that made them ineligible for VA health care. So the guidance that we get from the Health Eligibility Center at VA, which oversees all things eligibility for our entire healthcare system, is to encourage all veterans to apply for enrollment. And not to assume that because they have a discharge that was other than honorable, or that they think might preclude them from accessing VA services for whatever reason. Even if that was the case, historically, some of these recent changes may mean that it's not the case now, and they may be eligible to receive services from VA. So just want to emphasize that it's, their eligibility is an extremely complex area in VA. I could spend more than my allotted time talking about just that. But there are many ways that veterans can be eligible for VA services, even if they have even if their most recent discharge was one that was negative. Eligibility can be based on multiple periods of service, and veterans who were in the military for a considerable period of time often have more than one period of term of service to work with. They'll often have more than one discharge they received. If the first one of those was under honorable conditions, then despite the fact that the veteran's last one was even a dishonorable discharge, the veteran may be eligible for VA care based on that initial period of service. And so all that to say, the message from the department is that veterans should apply for enrollment in our healthcare system and not assume that they're not eligible without finding out for sure. So now if we could move on to the next slide. And talking about our system and, as a partner for you, I think this is a great example of how that can be done, although it's not the only example. VA doesn't have the authority to provide legal services to veterans itself, and it doesn't fund legal services outside the SSCF program. What we've done in response over the last several years is to, one, ask Congress for that authority, including in the most recent cycle of legislative proposals, and more immediately working up to the limits of our authority to help ensure that veterans do have access to legal services to the extent that we can help them get it. That's what you see here, and that's this policy that VA issued back in 2011, encouraging all the facilities in our system to share space with legal service providers so that they can work with veterans. when they're coming to us to receive care and may also have legal needs. There are more than 170 of these clinics operating across our system right now. 30 of them use the medical legal partnership model. I'll touch on that briefly again in a few minutes. But these clinics we've seen pop up in all different types of facilities across the VA healthcare system, the medical centers, so the full-size hospitals, the community-based outpatient clinics, and vet centers as well, the readjustment counseling service, these freestanding entities that are specifically for veterans who've had combat experience. These clinics are listed on our Office of General Counsel's website, and the link is available here. I've got a shot of it coming up in just a minute. And I think we can go ahead and switch to that for just, thank you. That's listed here. You see the types, well, you see that there are several types of information listed here. You maybe can't read what they are. But we do try and capture and list a fair amount of identifying information about these clinics, who's offering them, and what services they can provide. Just as a public service for veterans who are in these areas, may have these needs, and may be able to seek services there. As a one thought is that this could be a useful resource to you if you are looking to connect with other service providers in your area who work with veterans in a focused way. If they're providing one of these clinics in a VA facility, that means they have gone through a certain amount of our process, and I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But they could be good contacts if you're looking to reach out and work more closely with VA in your area. And so a little bit more about that process is on the next slide. Talking about what these partnerships look like. And again, here's the language from the policy. Our facilities are encouraged to offer space to legal service providers, and our staff are encouraged to refer veterans to legal service providers when they have unmet legal needs. Of course, there are some limitations to that. VA is not able to endorse any particular provider, including one that offers a clinic in one of our facilities, because we can't issue an endorsement on behalf of the government like that. We also have to post a disclaimer in space used by an outside provider just to draw the distinction, make clear that it's not a VA service. But within those limits, I think the number of clinics and the number of veterans that they're able to serve across the country really attests that there is still a lot that we can do despite some limitations. So if we could move to the next slide. Here's a little bit about what the process of being able to use space in one of our facilities, and some of what our Office of District Counsel will do just in order to lay the groundwork for that. Confirming, first of all, that the pro bono requirement is going to be met. Services that are provided on site in one of our facilities do need to be provided without cost. Providers do need to confirm that they won't be taking medical malpractice cases. That would be a conflict for the agency if we were hosting a provider who did that. VA benefits claims are okay. So that's a question that we get very often. There's no conflict there, and many of the clinics that are listed on that slide that I just showed help veterans with claims for VA benefits either as their sole focus or as one element of the services that they provide. So that is absolutely okay and encouraged. And on the next slide, speaking of benefits claims, there is, of course, the requirement for accreditation by the department. So if you are going to be working with veterans on these claims, you do need to go through that process and become VA accredited. All the information about the requirements for that and frequently asked questions, resources related to it, those are all available on the Office of General Counsel's website at the link here. And you can also search for accredited representatives in your area. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get a taste of, and this is not very exciting, a list is a list, but just to show that, that this can be done, this is a sample of the list of accredited attorneys in Kentucky where I live. And, another thought that I'd leave you with is using this list really as a Rolodex to identify potential collaborators. If you are serving veterans as a distinct population, this is a great resource that can point you to other providers in your area if you're looking to build a network for conflicts that you need to refer out when you reach capacity limits in your practice. This is a pretty thorough resource that's available to you in finding others who have a demonstrated interest in capacity and working with veterans on benefits issues, but of course many folks on this list practice much more broadly than that. So you can use this website to get their physical addresses, email, and phone contact information. So it's pretty thorough. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of that if that's not a resource that you're already familiar with. Next is my contact information, so that's there, and you've got that. Please don't hesitate to reach out. But if we keep moving just a little bit, I'll talk briefly about medical legal partnerships in VA, and very briefly, because I know I'm threatening the time requirement here. But as I mentioned, 30 of the 170 plus legal clinics that are operating on site in VA facilities now do follow the medical legal partnership model, and I know that has been covered at this point in this webinar series. But I did just want to emphasize that that really is a model and a type of partnership that the department is looking to spread as broadly as we can throughout our system. When we see some of what we're learning about about the value that medical legal partnerships add for the veterans who we're serving in our facilities, it's easy to see why. That has really been something that the department has seized on and is wanting to promote. You see some examples here, a veteran testimonial, and some of the feedback that we've gotten from our facilities. It's not just the positive outcomes for veterans, although of course that's the most important goal, but we're hearing that staff are more satisfied. Staff who are involved with these medical legal partnerships are more satisfied about the services that they're able to provide because veterans who are in their care are able to get access to this more holistic approach and get their needs addressed in a much more wraparound way. So if we move to the next slide, we have a little bit more information about impacts, and I just want to point everybody, I'm not sure if this was covered in the earlier presentation. I apologize if it was, but this was tremendously exciting news in the department. This is the first study of medical legal partnerships in VA medical centers. This looks at 4 facilities in New York and Connecticut, and the impacts that they had for veterans over the period of a couple of years. And we saw positive impacts in veterans' housing status, substance use, and mental health symptoms. We've got the link to that study here, as well as a summary that's available on the Woodruff Foundation's website. Last but not least, this has absolutely been covered, but I always like to direct folks to the MLP readiness guide that's already been presented on, as well as this issue brief talking about the growth of this model within the VA system. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand the mic back over to you, Casey, and thanks everybody for your interest and for the chance to talk with you this afternoon.
Great, thank you so much, Sean, for that, that fantastic overview of how the VA can partner with and support civil legal aid as these organizations provide assistance to veterans. So moving along, now we are going to launch into tech tools. So these tech tools can help you with referrals to your organization or provide training and education to professionals within your organization. So, for example, one of the tools later discussed from the ABA links visitors to a resource where they can look through training and continuing legal education for free so that lawyers can maintain their accreditation and serve veterans as best they can. So starting on this list, so Stateside Legal, this is the site that is run by Nan Heald in Pine Tree Legal Assistance. Unfortunately, she was unable to make this webinar. I will briefly go over her slides in just a bit, but to give you a little teaser, it is a one-stop shop for veterans to be connected with legal help for legal professionals to see what other providers might be in their areas, what pro bono opportunities there are. Justice for Vets is not necessarily for civil legal aid, but it does train and educate veteran treatment court professionals. And NOVA, the last one on the list, offers webinars and conference presentations that are led by veterans advocates. I should note that this resource is not free, and if you want to access one of their webinars or trainings or resources, you do have to pay for it. That being said, their resource list is phenomenal. So moving into even more tech tools, the FIRST app helps veterans with or without assistance of a veterans advocate determine specific VA benefits to which they are likely entitled. You can access that app through the second link, and then the first one gives you an overview of what they do. The Veterans Consortium is a consortium of attorneys who represent unrepresented veterans and their families in appeals for free of charge. The ABA Military and Veterans Legal Center, I'm going to pull out and highlight this one very soon. They have various initiatives, and it's designed for different populations, whether it be legal professionals or the general public, with resources to learn more, tools for self-represented veterans, and the like. The VA App Store is a very useful and good tool, and I should point out that it will soon analyze VA benefits. And finally, if you are not part of the William and Mary Veterans Listserv and you are interested in all things veteran, I highly recommend you sign up for it. You can submit your request just by emailing them at the following link. And I should note that if all of these slides will be uploaded on the NLADA webinar page, so you don't have to type in the full URL. You can just go through and click. All right, so highlighting the ABA Military and Veterans Legal Center. So this center is a hub for resources for the public, legal professionals, and it also hosts various initiatives. You can be registered to be contacted by the ABA Military Pro Bono Project with opportunities to provide pro bono counsel, and volunteer your time to receive calls or emails from military attorneys in need of attorney-to-attorney assistance. The Military Pro Bono Center also offers training and CLE, some of which are free, which can help with training and maintaining accreditation for lawyers within your organization. At the tool on the bottom left, the directory of programs, you can check out the directory and add your organization or see if there are other resources in your area. So for example, if a veteran walks through your doors and you don't have the resources to serve them, you might be able to refer them to a pro bono project in the area, or let's say they don't meet the income requirement to be served by your particular organization, you might be able to refer them out to pro or low bono organizations or initiatives. And then finally, there is one other ABA tool, which is VetLex. VetLex connects and refers veterans, active duty military, and spouse and dependents to legal aid organizations, pro bono or low bono, attorneys across the nation. It doesn't provide legal services, but it acts as a system of intake, assessment, and referral for veterans. There are also several other federal agency websites that can assist you. So the DOJ website provides a summary of recent enforcement actions, information on the Service Member Civil Relief Act, which provides protections for military members as they enter active duty. The link below through the Department of Labor provides occupational license portability resources and information on the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, which protects service members and veteran civilian employment rights. The FTC provides information on consumer protection, debt, and scams. The CFPB has information on the Military Lending Act, student loans and other forms of financial abuse. And finally, the National Resource Directory has a list of resources related to benefits and compensation, education and training, employment, family, health, and more. They also have a directory of legal rights assistance, and you can get your organization listed.
This is Nan Heald, and I have the pleasure of talking about Stateside Legal. This is a website that we launched in 2011 at the White House with funding from the Legal Services Corporation Technology Initiatives Grant Program. We are currently averaging about 12,000 visitors a week from literally all over the world, but of course primarily from folks in the United States. And as we'll be talking over the next few minutes, the website is always in the process of being updated, but we're in the midst of doing a pretty big overhaul of it right now. So this is the homepage for the website. We were lucky enough to do pretty much of a major update a couple of years ago on the homepage to try and make it a little bit easier for people to navigate. And so we did that process with help from lots of people, including our ongoing website advisory board that includes lawyers and individuals with military service around the country. They're described in more detail in the About Us tab at the bottom of the home page in case anyone's interested. We also look to our website advisors to help us with new legal developments and with content wherever we can entice them into doing so. One of the primary goals for Stateside Legal was to try and help people with military service, either current or past, and their family members who have legal problems figure out how to find help. And obviously, tracking all the people that might be able to provide legal help isn't really feasible. So we started with a more modest goal, which was to include the military legal assistance offices around the country that provide some forms of primarily legal advice and information to people who are currently enrolled in the military. And that can include both National Guard and Army Reserve folks, as well as people in the different branches. Those are mostly JAG officers, but in some, for instance, the Coast Guard refers to them as military legal assistance advisors. They may not be licensed in the state where they are stationed, but they do have general information they can provide help to. So JAG is the database listing for those folks. Another really important category are what we call in Maine the lawyer referral and information services. They're primarily maintained by the state bar or the local bar, and it's the place you refer someone, at least at my program, if they're over income for civil legal aid services, but they want to they want to be able to talk to a lawyer. And so these services generally operate by providing a consultation for 30 minutes for a relatively modest fee. The client and the attorney have to work things out beyond that if the client wants more help. But it's a great way for people who are looking to understand an area of law to start. The other big category that we refer a lot of people to are what's listed here as LSC providers. And the truth is that most of them are currently grantees of the Legal Services Corporation because we were able to get that database directly from LSC. But this is an area where if people would like to be listed, and we would like you to be listed if you are a civil legal aid provider, and that includes law school clinics as well as other nonprofit agencies that might be providing services to people who are veterans or have military service. We would like to be able to have that database updated to include all of your programs. And you can contact me, and my contact information is provided elsewhere to let me know your information. The other big category are the state agencies. Here they're listed as veteran service agencies. state agencies, sometimes they're county-based, that provide mostly help with VA benefits and other state benefits that are particular to military service. Again, it's good to know who they are in your community, and you may be able to partner with them. So that's the Find Legal Help map, and it's organized by state and by these different acronyms. And our goal is to provide the current intake line, public line for people to call, as well as the street address and town where the program is based. We get a lot of traffic to the Find Legal Help directory. Another really important impetus behind creating statewide legal was to help people with military service understand the specific laws and rights that relate to their status in the military, either currently or as a veteran, and the intersection with benefits and laws that apply to all people or may apply to people with disabilities or people who are low income. When Pine Tree was working on this website, that was important for us because Maine has a lot of people with military service in our community, and we were serving a lot of those people, but our staff didn't know a lot about the VA benefit system and some of the other laws that apply to people who are in active duty that might protect them in an eviction context or with debt. And so Know Your Rights this is written for the public, not for lawyers, and we've tried to group it in what seemed to us to be fairly intuitive categories that people would be looking for information on. So among the more popular ones are obviously benefits, housing and real estate, which includes landlord-tenant, health and safety, education. There's a really important law, interstate compact, that applies to children in military families that move around a lot in terms of the way the schools have to treat those children. And then family matters, of course, divorce, and the impact of divorce and child custody and child support is also a really big and important issue for military families that move around a lot and for families that include a veteran who may be receiving disability benefits because of their veteran status. I wanted to zero in on the Discharge upgrade classroom because that is both a really important topic right now. There are a lot of people who were discharged with other than honorable conditions, and that impacts, and it may be, and in some cases, dishonorable discharges for reasons that today we would not find so persuasive. And there is an effort to try and review and upgrade those discharges so that people are eligible for VA benefits and services as much as possible. We were really lucky to work with the legal clinic at Yale to get this discharge upgrade classroom developed. It's a step-by-step explanation of how to do this. It was written for the benefit of the public, and in fact, we have heard from people who have been able to use this discharge upgrade classroom to address their own personal situation. But as with a lot of self-help tools, it's also great for those of us who are advocates to better understand the process. And this is the kind of tool that we would like to expand on the website as we have time and the resources to do so. Another project that we are working on right now has to do with addressing what I think is well recognized as a real problem for veterans who have experienced a lot of trauma during their service. They may have post-traumatic stress disorder, they may have experienced military sexual trauma, and there's definitely a high risk of suicide in this client population. And so the goal of this product, this triage tool, which is still a work in progress, is to try and help caseworkers who are supporting those veterans understand more about the legal system and the extent to which certain triggers in the legal system are exacerbating the stress that their clients are experiencing. And obviously we know that debt issues can create a lot of anxiety, as can family law, discharge upgrades, the lack of housing, the risk of homelessness, frustration with the way the VA is handling the benefit system for veterans. So our goal with this triage tool is to take each one of these categories and then break it into specific resources on Stateside Legal that will hopefully both help the caseworker understand more about the legal system and also help the client or the client's family member know where they should look next for help. This is something that we want to have done by the end of December at the very latest this year. So check back and we'll have this product done with a lot of that detail. And as with all of the resources on Stateside Legal, if you are working with something and you know a way that it could be improved, I also would encourage everybody to reach out and let me know, because we want it to be the best possible resource that it can for the wide variety of people that are using it. We also wanted to have Stateside Legal have information for advocates and attorneys. Again, as I mentioned, Pine Tree, when we started this process, we didn't have a lot of internal staff expertise in any of these legal systems, and in a shocking development, they have their own rules, their own regs, their own ways of doing things. And so the advocate resources section, which if you're on the home page is in sort of the middle area, has toolkits that are designed to address some of these sort of areas of expertise. So there's all the, under the military toolkit, there are the websites for the Coast Guard and the Army and the Navy, et cetera. And some of the specific regulations that apply to military families around moving, what happens if there's domestic violence in the household, et cetera. There's a toolkit for the VA legal resources, which includes their regulations, some of which are internal guidance for their staff, so they're obviously really helpful for all of us to be aware of. There's a wonderful searchable database of the Bureau of Veteran Appeals decision, which gives you a great sense of where they're thinking when you're working with a client on an appeal of a disability case. And then there's one that's called the VA Advocate Toolkit, which has information about the VA accreditation process, although I know Sean talked about that earlier in this presentation. And then the resources section, which is a little bit different, but in the same general area. We've tried to include a smattering of law review articles or cheat sheets and emerging decisions that we think are important. And there are some wonderful resources out there, and certainly more resources today than when we first started Stateside Legal for the legal aid community that wants to get involved in this work. Again, if there are things that you have found really useful in your practice that would be helpful to have us include on Stateside Legal, I really hope that you'd let me know. And just keep telling us what is needed. My contact information, I think, is on the slide, but if not, so Nan Heald, Pine Tree Legal. Our number here in Maine is area code 207, and my direct dial is 400-3213, and my email is nheald@ptla.org. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nan, for sharing with us your work around Stateside Legal. It is an absolutely phenomenal resource, and we are so grateful that you were able to share with us about how it serves the legal aid community and the veterans that we work we move on to Q&A. So if you haven't sent your questions yet and you would like Sean, me, or Radhika to answer your questions, please send them on in. We'll wait a few minutes, compile them, and then we'll start this session. All right, Sean, so we have a few questions for you here. So how long does it take to set up a VA MLP? Like, what does the timeline look like from start planning phases to finish your on the ground and running it?
I think there are probably 30 different answers to that based on the 30 that we've got set up in the system right now. But, you know, I wouldn't want to undersell it. It is, you know, it is a process that does take, I would say, a substantial amount of time. But, you know, just because there are a number of steps to go through on the VA side, you know, we do need to get an MOU in place with the provider. There's some additional paperwork, just a revocable license agreement for using our space. And, you know, before those, you know, before the paperwork gets nailed down, there's just the basic question of sitting down and figuring out what all the parties want, and, you know, what the legal service provider is in a position to offer as far as capacity, you know, with both subject matter and with time. And, you know, how many veterans they could envision serving, and what kind of referral mechanism and, you know, dynamic for interacting between the attorneys and the clinicians is going to best meet everybody's needs. So I don't want to scare anybody away, but there are a number of moving parts to be figured out. You know, if you're coming from a place where there's an existing partnership, if you're, you know, if you're working closely with an SSVF grantee, for example, and, you know, there may be some existing relationship with the medical center to draw on, then maybe that might help cut down on some of that lead time. But I wouldn't want to put a number to it, but I would say, you know, expect that there are a number of issues that do need to be worked out before services can be provided. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but I wouldn't want to pick a number if that's and have that be just wildly different based on your circumstances and what you've got to figure out with your local facility.
Great, thank you. So another question for you: are VA clinics or medical centers providing funding for these MLPs? And
no. I'm sorry, but that goes back to the point about our lack of authority to fund services outside of the SSVF grant mechanism. So we don't have a set of funds available for legal service providers to come in and provide these clinics on site in our facilities. Yeah, sorry. I know there's a second part, but that was the easy part, I'm sure.
That is fine. And then, do you know how legal aid organizations are obtaining this external funding or the typical commitment of the clinic to the partnership in terms of resources?
So our medical legal partnerships, you'll see if you look on that list on OGC's website, there are providers of several different stripes. There are law school clinics that are providing the legal services. There are LSC-funded organizations and legal aid providers that receive funding from sources other than LSC as well. They are getting their resources from a number of different external sources, so there's really no common thread to point to there. So it's not a single external source that all of these MLPs are being funded through. It's however these providers are getting their funding prior to the partnership getting put in place, if that's helpful.
Great, thank you. And then from your outreach and work, how receptive are VA healthcare facilities to these legal service providers and the potential partnerships that they would offer?
I think so. Several things to say quickly there. At the department level, this is something that there is enthusiastic support for within the leadership in our agency. Medical center directors as well, and they're a part of the process, typically at the end, but they need to. They're in charge ultimately of these facilities, and it's their signature on the MOU that allows these arrangements to be finalized, and they often are very enthusiastic and supportive as well, because one of the ways that their performance is evaluated within our system has to do with the community partnerships that they build and shepherd into delivering results for veterans. So it's something that's very important to them as well. It's important to say that there are some potentials for staff in clinicians, and I don't think this is unique to VA. I think this is a broader observation about clinicians facing the prospect of working with attorneys in a partnership. There is, I think, a history and kind of a culture of, one side viewing the other with suspicion, and certainly on the part of clinicians, you're thinking malpractice. You're thinking about partnering with folks who historically you may have seen as, as sources of potential trouble and making your life complicated. That said, the examples that we have in our system, the feedback that we get from them is, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that clinicians are reporting great satisfaction with having these partnerships in place, their own satisfaction, that they're getting more out of their work by, when these partnerships are in place and these services are available to veterans within their own facility. So I think, again, I don't want to undersell, just like the planning time issue, I don't want to undersell the possibility that, this takes some adjustment for clinicians potentially in our system. And, we're working to, VA has a medical legal partnership task force that I'm a part of, my colleague Lara is a part of, and, we're working to try and educate our clinician population about the MLP model and about the benefits that it offers for veterans and for them as well. But that's You know, we're a big system. There's a lot of variation, and it's entirely possible that, you know, there could be clinicians who are hesitant in any one of our facilities about this idea. That said, you know, pulling one of these off requires a significant number of people on the VA side at one of our facilities, and I have not heard yet about there being, you know, a wall of opposition or top-to-bottom skepticism or no one being interested. There may be one or two who are not sure whether it's a good idea or may not be enthusiastic about it. But I think, you know, raising this issue of unmet legal needs, when you talk to providers in our system, especially those who've been around for a long time, it's not news to them that this is an unmet need, and they've had the experience of working with a veteran who is facing this significant barrier that they have no tool to help the veteran address, and that our system doesn't have a tool to help them address. And so I think the defining response is this is a great resource, and people are eager to help veterans get access to it. That was probably a longer answer than you were going for, but that I think is the broader view in our system.
No, I think that was a great answer. And there was a follow-up question to that, but you answered it. So are there we don't have any more questions from the audience members. Is there anything else, Sean, that you would like to add before we move on to the last slide with just some wrap-up notes?
No, I'll just say thank you again very much, everybody, for your interest and for having me.
And thank you so much, Sean, for taking time out of your day to join our webinar and share with us the work that you and the VA are doing to support civil legal aid. So before you go and exit out of the webinar, I just have one more thing for you to do. So if you like us and the Justice and Government Project, which is a project run out of American University, help us better meet your needs. We have a survey asking you about the effectiveness of our training and technical assistance, like this webinar, and we would like to hear from you how we have or haven't shaped how you apply for federal funding, what sorts of grants you receive, and how you think our webinars, conferences, and more could be made more effective. And then I will just put out a plug for our new newsletter. It is called Just Research. It is co-created with the Justice and Government Project, and we send you curated research, advocacy in action, where to find data, and helpful tools, resources, and more once a month in your inbox. We are going on our third month of doing this. So the first month was on reentry. The second month, which you can access through the tiny URL link, was on veterans. And next month, or I guess this month, now that it's October, will be on opioids. So stay tuned for that. You can sign up for our newsletter at the link listed. And as always, if you are a legal aid organization seeking individualized technical assistance, maybe you need help on a grant, or you want to brainstorm how to reach out to a grant administrator or a policymaker, we are here to help. Please send us your requests at resourcedesk@NLADA, and we will do our very best to get back with you within a few days. All right, thank you everyone for joining our webinar, sticking with us, learning about the resources that the VA can offer and some of the tech tools that can help you and veterans in your community. If you have any questions that are burning that you would like to ask Nan that we were unable to answer, please just send an email to resourcedesk@NLADA, and we will ask her in her re-recorded section. All right, thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your week.